I used to believe that rules existed to prevent the worst possible outcome. That if you followed every line, checked every box, and never cut a single corner, the terrible thing couldn't happen. The fire couldn't reach you. The person beside you wouldn't get hurt. The night would pass, and the morning would come, and you could look at yourself in whatever mirror was available and know, really know, that you did everything right. I carried that belief into the mountains like a packed lunch. Practical. Necessary. Mine. My name is Collin Bryce. For 18 months, I was stationed at Kettle Hollow Ranger Station in the Nantahala National Forest, western North Carolina. 3 rangers, 14 miles of gravel road, no cell service past mile marker 3, and a laminated binder of standard operating procedures that contained 6 rules. 5 of those rules, every ranger followed without question. Not grudgingly, not with eye rolls or shortcuts. They followed them the way you follow the instruction to not touch a hot stove, instinctively, completely, without needing to understand the reason. You just did. The 6th rule, every ranger ignored. Not broke, not bent, ignored. The way you ignore a door in your house that opens to a room you've decided doesn't exist. You walk past it. You don't look at the knob. You certainly don't turn it. I turned it. I followed the 6th rule on my 9th night at Kettle Hollow. I conducted a physical headcount at 2,200 hours, like the binder said. I walked to each room. I visually confirmed each person. I wrote the names in the daily operations log and initialed the entry before 22:30, exactly as the procedure required. The count came back wrong. Not short, not missing someone. Wrong in the other direction. Wrong in the direction that doesn't have a procedure. Wrong in the direction that makes you set the pen down and stare at what you just wrote, and feel the air in the room settle against your skin like something damp. It hasn't been right since. I need to tell someone what's happening at that station. I need to walk through it from the beginning so that when I get to the parts that don't make sense, you'll understand that I am not a man who panics. I am not a man who sees things. I am a man who follows rules because the one time I didn't follow a rule, someone I cared about paid for it with his skin. That's where this starts. Not with the mountain, not with the station, with a fire. The burnover on engine 7 lasted 11 seconds. That's what the after-action report said. 11 seconds of flame, front overrunning our position on a ridge in Pisgah National Forest, while the wind did something the models hadn't predicted. 11 seconds is nothing. 11 seconds is the length of a held breath, a slow sip of coffee, the time it takes to tie a boot. 11 seconds was long enough for me to freeze. We had protocol. We had shelters. We had a deployment sequence I'd drilled 40 times in training and twice in the field. When the front crested the ridge and the radiant heat hit us like opening an oven door the size of the sky, I was supposed to call it. One word. Deploy. That was my job. I was nearest to the wind gauge. I had the visual. I was supposed to call it, and we'd go to ground. Marcus Ware was 3 feet to my left. He was already reaching for his shelter. He knew. His body knew before the call came, because Marcus had good instincts, the kind you can't teach, the kind that live in the back of your neck, and pull you down before your brain catches up. I gave the call 4 seconds late. 4 seconds. In a structure fire, 4 seconds is a rounding error. In a burnover, 4 seconds is the difference between a near-miss story you tell over beer and third-degree burns across both shoulders and the back of a man's neck. The kind of burns that don't heal so much as reorganize. The kind that make a man wince when he puts on a jacket for the rest of his life. Marcus never blamed me. He said the wind was unforecastable. He said nobody would have called it faster. He said those things in the burn unit at Mission Hospital, with gauze from his hairline to his shoulder blades, and I stood there and nodded, and knew he was being generous, with a truth that had a much sharper edge. After that, I became a man of procedures. Not because I believed in redemption through paperwork, because I understood, finally, that the rules aren't for the normal moments. They're for the 4 seconds when your brain locks up and your hands forget what they're supposed to do. The rules do the thinking for you. They carry you across the gap. I requested a transfer to the quietest post available, somewhere remote, somewhere the biggest daily emergency was a downed tree across a service road. The district supervisor pulled up a list, and Kettle Hollow was right there at the top, the way it apparently always was, perpetually understaffed, perpetually available, a station that functioned less like a sought-after posting and more like a last resort or a place to disappear. No one ever wanted Kettle Hollow. That suited me fine. The drive-in was the last time everything felt completely ordinary. October, late afternoon. The gravel road off the state highway started well enough, graded, firm, wide enough for 2 vehicles to pass. County maintained, or at least county adjacent. Mailboxes appeared at the first few miles. A church. A volunteer fire department with a single bay and a sign out front advertising a pancake supper from 3 months prior. Then the mailboxes stopped. The road narrowed after mile 3, which is also where my phone lost signal and didn't find it again. Hardwoods pressed in close. Tulip poplar, red oak, sourwood, their canopies mostly bare by then, just enough leaf left to filter the light into something gray and granular. The gravel got rougher. Potholes deepened. I slowed to 15, then 10. My government-issue pickup rattled like a box of loose tools. Kettle Hollow is a geological anomaly. A cove so deep and narrow that the surrounding ridges block direct sunlight for all but a few hours a day, fewer than 5 in winter. The cove walls are steep, laurel-choked, ribboned with small creeks that feed a branch of the Nantahala. As I descended, the temperature dropped noticeably. The air took on weight. Moisture collected on the windshield in a fine mist that wasn't quite rain. The station appeared around a bend at mile 14, like something the forest had been slowly digesting. Citas e era construction, 1930s. Native stone foundation, heavy timber frame, low ceilings, small windows set deep in the walls. Moss covered the north-facing stone in a carpet so thick it looked intentional. A narrow porch wrapped the front. An American flag hung limp from a pole that needed paint. Functional, deliberate, a building that didn't want to be noticed. Dale was on the porch. He stood up from a wooden chair when I pulled in, moved down the steps with a kind of practiced economy, No rush, no hesitation. He was mid-50s, lean, with the sun-cured face of a man who'd spent 2 decades in weather. His handshake was dry and measured. His eyes were calm, the way a lake is calm when it's deep enough that you can't see the bottom. Collin Bryce, welcome to the end of the road. He said it like a fact, not a joke. He took one of my bags without asking and walked inside. Carla was in the kitchen. She came around the counter, wiping her hands on a dish towel, and offered a handshake that was firmer than Dale's. Late 40s, dark hair pulled back, reading glasses on a cord around her neck. She had the particular competence of a person who knows exactly where every tool is, and has opinions about how the dishwasher should be loaded. "You eat pork?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am." "Good. Dinner's at 6. Dale will show you your bunk." There was warmth there, genuine warmth. But something about the station felt like a stage 10 minutes before curtain. Everything was in its place. The kitchen was clean. The ops room was tidy. The porch chairs were evenly spaced. I couldn't identify what was wrong, only that the word that kept surfacing in my mind was rehearsed. Like they'd been expecting not just a new ranger, but an audience. Dale carried my bag upstairs. 3 sleeping quarters on the upper floor, each one small, each one identical. A single bed, a metal locker, a window the size of a microwave door. He set my bag on the bed in the last room and paused in the doorway. "Settle in. Come down when you're ready. We'll go over the SOPs after dinner." He said SOPs, the way someone might say house rules at a vacation rental. Casually, but with the expectation that you'd read every word. I unpacked. I hung my jacket on the hook behind the door. I sat on the bed and listened to the station. Somewhere below, a generator hummed at a low, constant pitch. The building ticked and settled around me, the way old timber does in cooling air. Through the small window, the last of the daylight was already draining from the cove, pulled down behind the western ridge like a slow curtain. It was 4:30 in the afternoon. Dinner was pork chops, canned green beans, and white rice cooked in a cast-iron skillet that looked older than the station. Carla moved around the kitchen with the ease of long practice. Dale set the table. 3 places, 3 glasses of water, napkins folded once. The domesticity of it was disarming. It felt like arriving at a relative's house, the kind of relative who keeps things orderly and goes to bed early and doesn't own a television. But I noticed things. I noticed them because noticing things is what I do now, what the burnover made me, a man who inventories every room he enters. There were no personal photographs anywhere. Not on the fridge, not on the walls, not tucked into the frame of a mirror. The common areas were clean, but anonymous. Government issue furniture, topographic maps, a USFS calendar turned to the correct month. No snapshots of families or friends, no postcards, no evidence that the people living here had lives outside this cove. The 2-way radio on the ops room desk was on, but turned so low I could barely hear it. A faint wash of static, like distant water. It was the kind of volume you'd set if you wanted to technically be monitoring, but preferred not to hear what came through. And the basement door, a heavy, original timber door at the end of the ground floor hallway, had a padlock on it, not a combination lock. A heavy gauge keyed padlock, the kind you'd put on a storage unit or a gun safe. I'd seen basement archives before. They didn't usually warrant serious hardware. Small wrongnesses. None of them alarming on their own. All of them accumulating quietly, like sediment. After dinner, Dale reached behind the radio console and produced a 3-ring binder with a faded green cover. Standard Operating Procedures was typed on a label on the spine. He set it on the table between us with a gentleness that didn't match its appearance. Read through this tonight. All the way through. Questions in the morning. He said it the way a doctor says, take all of the antibiotics. Not a suggestion. I took the binder to my bunk. I opened it. There were 6 rules. The first concerned the stone cairns along the perimeter trail. They were considered USFS property, not to be disturbed, not to be added to. Standard enough. But the second paragraph was unusual. If I encountered a cairn not marked on the reference map, I was to photograph it from no closer than 10 feet and report the GPS coordinates to district. Under no circumstances was I to approach an unmarked cairn. The language was specific. The distance was specific. 10 feet. The second rule governed radio communications. Every transmission had to open with the station call sign and close with a specific phrase. Station kettle, clear. If an incoming transmission omitted the closing phrase or came through on an unregistered call sign, the instruction was clear. Don't acknowledge it. Log the time and frequency. Don't trace the source. The word don't appeared 3 times in 2 sentences. The 4th rule addressed the basement file room. Accessible between 0700 and 1700 only. Any files removed had to be returned before 1700. And here was the part that made me read the sentence twice. Documents were not to be read while inside the basement. If you needed to review a file, you carried it upstairs. You read it at ground level. Something about the phrasing, ground level, felt less like a description of a floor and more like a boundary. The 5th rule covered hiker search and rescue protocol. If someone reported being separated from their hiking party, I was not to initiate SAR until the party's existence had been independently confirmed through district dispatch. I was not to leave the station unattended, based solely on an individual's account. The rule didn't say why someone would fabricate a lost hiking party. It didn't need to. The fact that the rule existed said enough. The 6th rule was the simplest and the strangest for its simplicity. Personal photographs, journals, identification documents, or any item bearing a full legal name had to be stored in the assigned locker. Not displayed. Not left in common areas. Not the kitchen. Not the ops room. Not the porch. I thought of the bare walls downstairs, the anonymous rooms, the clean, nameless surfaces. They hadn't forgotten to decorate. They were following a rule. Then there was Rule 3. At 2200 hours, the senior on-duty ranger was to conduct a physical headcount. Each person in the station had to be visually confirmed and identified by name. Radio confirmation was explicitly listed as unacceptable. Intercom confirmation was explicitly listed as unacceptable. The count was to be entered in the daily operations log and initialed before 22:30. It was, on its face, the most mundane rule in the binder. A head count. A bureaucratic checkbox. 3 people in a station at the end of a 14-mile gravel road. Who wouldn't be here? I brought the binder downstairs the next morning and set it on the kitchen table while Dale poured coffee. Rule 3, I said. The head count. Who does it? Dale's hand didn't stop pouring, but there was a pause. Not in his motion. In him. A fractional delay between hearing the question and deciding how to hold his face. That one's more of a legacy item, he said, from when the station ran a bigger crew. He changed the subject to the weather forecast. He did it smoothly, the way water moves around a stone. I didn't let it go. That evening, after Carla finished cleaning the kitchen and Dale settled into the ops room chair with a folded newspaper, I brought it up again, casually. The way you mention something you've already decided to pursue, but don't want to telegraph. So nobody does the head count? Carla dried a mug and placed it on the shelf without turning around. It's a 3-person station, Collin. We know who's here. The binder says visual confirmation, logged and initialed. The binder says a lot of things. She turned and gave me a look that was warm but closed, like a door with a welcome mat. That rules from when they had 8, 10 people rotating through. Seasonal crews, volunteers. You needed a head count then. Now it's just us. Dale didn't look up from his paper. She's right. It's vestigial, like an appendix. They used different words, but the same reasoning, delivered with the same studied casualness, the same careful weight of people who had agreed on an answer long before the question was asked. I nodded. I let the conversation move on. But later that night, after they'd both gone upstairs, I pulled the daily operations log from the shelf in the ops room. It was a thick, cloth-bound ledger. 1 line per day. Columns for weather. Patrol notes, incident reports, maintenance, and, in a narrow column near the right margin, the head count entry. I started at the current date and worked backward. The head count column was blank. Not for days, not for weeks, for 7 consecutive years. 2,555 days of daily entries, each one filled in with careful, legible handwriting. Weather recorded. Patrols logged. Maintenance noted. Incidents documented. And the head count column left empty. Every single day. The blankness wasn't an oversight. It was a decision. It was the most consistent thing in the entire log. 7 years of Rangers walking past Rule 3, the way you walk past a door you've agreed doesn't open. I closed the ledger. I put it back on the shelf. I sat in the ops room chair and listened to the low static of the radio and the generator hum and the sound of the old building settling around me. And I thought about the kind of rule that everyone follows by not following. I didn't sleep well that night. Not because of fear, because of the question. The question that every procedural bone in my body needed answered before I could let it go. What were they afraid they'd count? Morning came slowly in the cove. The light didn't arrive so much as seep in, gray and reluctant, filtered through the bare ridgeline above. I laced my boots. I zipped my jacket. I needed a patrol. I needed gravel under my feet and cold air in my lungs and the simple, answerable problems of trail maintenance and boundary markers. I needed the kind of work that made sense. I left at 06:30 with a day pack, a handheld radio, and the kind of checklist that makes a new posting feel like home. trail condition assessment, water quality sampling at 3 points along Kettle Creek, wildlife census markers to verify. The clipboard had columns for everything. Columns I understood. The hollow in morning light was nothing like the place I'd driven into the night before. The gravel road had felt like a throat closing around me, narrowing, darkening, pulling me down. But dawn rewrote that. The eastern ridgeline caught the sun first, a thin gold line that widened and spilled down through the hardwoods in slow sheets. Below the deciduous canopy, the hemlocks took over. Old growth. Trunks 4 feet across, bark furrowed deep enough to press your thumb into, branches layered so dense overhead they turned the understory into something close to a nave. Sound behaved differently in there. My boots on the trail came back to me half a second late, softened, like the forest was repeating what I said and choosing its words more carefully. I liked it. I want to be honest about that. After Pisgah, after the noise and the heat and the way a fire line smells when things go wrong. After all of that, Kettle Hollow felt like a reward. The creek ran clear over sandstone ledges. The census markers were where the map said they'd be. I logged 2 red-tailed hawks on a thermal above the south ridge, noted a section of puncheon bridging on the lower loop that needed redecking, measured the water temperature at each sampling point, and wrote the numbers in neat figures. Professional work. Clean work. The kind of work where you follow a procedure, and the procedure keeps everything in order. The cairns appeared about a mile in along the perimeter trail. 5 of them, spaced at uneven intervals, stacked from local granite. Flat pieces, carefully balanced, none taller than knee height. I stopped at each one, checked them against the reference map Dale had left in the ops room. Every cairn matched. Position, approximate height, even the number of stones. Someone had mapped them precisely, and someone had maintained them. The moss growth on the lower stones suggested they'd been standing for years. Decades, maybe. I gave each one its 10-foot clearance without thinking about it. Rule 1 felt easy, reasonable, the kind of guideline you'd expect in a forest with cultural resources. I marked them as present and undisturbed, clipped the pen back to the board, and kept walking. The trail turned uphill after the last cairn, switchbacking through a stand of yellow birch toward the ridgeline. I checked my watch. Plenty of daylight. I decided to extend the patrol. The ridge trail was an old fire road, overgrown but still legible. 2 ruts of packed earth with a strip of wiregrass growing between them. The grade steepened in the last quarter mile, and by the time I reached the top, my calves burned, and my breathing had found that steady, mechanical rhythm that long climbs settle into. I stopped where the canopy broke, wiped my face with my sleeve, looked down. Kettle Hollow opened below me like a wound in the terrain. The ridgelines on either side angled inward, steep and dark with hemlock, converging on the narrow crease where the station sat. From up here, I could see the whole drainage, the silver thread of the creek, the pale line of the gravel road, the clearing where the station's stone walls and green metal roof caught what little direct light reached the bottom. It looked smaller than it should have. I'd walked through those rooms that morning. I knew the dimensions. But from the ridge, the station seemed compressed, as though the hollow were exerting some slow geological pressure on it. Shadows collected around the foundation and the tree line behind the building in a way that didn't quite track with the sun's position. The light was coming from the southeast. The shadows should have been pulling northwest. But the dark around the station pooled evenly, like water finding a low point. I told myself it was the canopy. Dense hemlock will do that. Hold shade in places where open sky should reach. I wrote nothing on the clipboard. There was no column for the way a building sits in its landscape. I started back down. Took the East Fork, where a secondary trail split toward an old survey benchmark. The trail hadn't been maintained, blowdowns across it. Leaf litter deep and undisturbed. No boot prints. No sign of foot traffic in what looked like months. Then boot prints. They appeared 30 yards in, pressed into soil that had no business holding impressions that clean. The ground was firm, packed clay under a thin layer of duff. But the prints were crisp, vibram pattern soles, a size 10 or 11, consistent stride length. Someone walking with purpose. I followed them, counting paces. 30 yards of steady, evenly spaced prints along the center of the trail. They stopped, not at a junction, not at a blowdown or a rock face or a creek crossing. The trail continued ahead, unobstructed. But the prints ended as though the person walking had simply ceased to exist between one step and the next. No scuff marks, no pivot, no return track, heading back the way they'd come. I stood at the last print for a long time. I checked the margins of the trail for any sign of departure into the brush. Nothing. No broken branches. No displaced leaves. I logged the location, marked it on my map, and hiked back to the station before the light left the hollow floor. Radio watch ran from 2000 to midnight. Dale had the first shift, but he traded with me when I offered. I think he was glad to give it up. He didn't say that. He said, "Sure, if you want the practice," and left the ops room without looking at the console. The radio was a Motorola base unit, older model, bolted to the desk beside the window that faced the road. Frequencies were preset. District dispatch on channel 1, mutual aid on 2, a forestry repeater on 3, and channel 4 labeled only KH-local in faded marker on a strip of masking tape. I monitored all 4, the way you do. Volume low. Squelch set just above the noise floor. The ops room had that particular nighttime quiet of a building in a place with no traffic, no neighbors, no ambient electrical hum from anything except the generator out back. I could hear the creak through the walls if I held still. At 2037, Channel 4 broke squelch. The voice was male, mid-range, unhurried, with the flat, professional cadence of someone making a routine report. The kind of voice you hear 100 times on forestry frequencies and never remember afterward. Station Kettle, this is Everett, KH-14. Conducting patrol check along the upper perimeter. Trail conditions nominal. No observed damage from last night's wind event. Cairn markers at positions 2 through 5 are intact and undisturbed. Water level at the North Fork crossing is approximately 6 inches below the bridge deck. Proceeding south along the transmission cut. Not sharply. Not the clean break of a released push-to-talk button. The voice continued for a fraction of a second after the signal degraded, syllables dissolving into static, like a conversation moving out of range, as though whoever was speaking kept talking after the radio stopped carrying his words. I sat with my hand on the volume knob. The squelch tail hissed and died. Channel 4 went silent. I waited. Standard practice. If a transmission is incomplete, you wait 30 seconds and attempt contact. I watched the clock on the wall tick through those 30 seconds. Then I keyed the mic. KH-14 station kettle. Say again your last. Over. Nothing. I tried twice more. Dead air. The closing phrase. I replayed it in my head, matching the words against Rule 2. He'd never said it. Station kettle. Clear. The entire transmission, calm, detailed, professionally delivered, had ended without the required sign-off. I was reaching for the logbook when Dale appeared in the doorway. I hadn't heard him come down the stairs. He was wearing his sleeping clothes. A faded USFS t-shirt and gym shorts, but he didn't look like he'd been sleeping. He looked like he'd been sitting up in the dark, waiting. He crossed the room and turned the volume knob down. Not off. Down. Just enough that the speaker would barely register over the sound of the generator. Log the time, he said. His voice was the same as always. Even. Measured. Impossible to read. He didn't ask what I'd heard. He didn't ask me to replay it or report it to district. Dale, that call sign. Everett, KH-14. Who is that? He was already in the hallway. Log the time, Collin. That's all you need to do with it. I logged the time. Then I opened the frequency binder. The frequency log for Channel 4 went back 3 years. The binder was organized by month. Each page ruled into columns. Date, time, call sign, duration, content summary, action taken. The handwriting changed. Dale's tight block print, Carla's slanted cursive, 2 or 3 other hands I didn't recognize. Former staff, presumably. People who'd come to Kettle Hollow and then moved on. Everett's call sign appeared 43 times. I counted twice to be sure. 43 entries spanning 26 months. The earliest was dated 2 Novembers ago. The most recent, before tonight, was 11 days before my arrival. Every entry followed the same pattern. Time logged. Frequency noted. Content summary. Patrol report. Incomplete transmission. No sign-off. Action taken. No response per protocol. 43 times someone had heard that voice come through the speaker, and 43 times the only response had been a line in a binder. I pulled the personnel rotation file from the shelf above the radio desk. Kettle Hollow maintained a slim folder of assignment records. Names, dates, position codes, transfer notes. Everett, James R. Position, Forestry Technician, GS5. Assigned to Kettle Hollow, 14 months before the first logged transmission. Transfer date, the same month the transmissions began. The transfer notation read, reassigned. District lateral. See District HR file. No forwarding station. No new assignment code. No supervisor signature on the out-processing line. Just the word reassigned and a reference to a file that was presumably sitting in some district office filing cabinet 60 miles from here. I closed the binder, sat with it in my lap. The generator hummed outside. The creek moved. I thought about the basement, the row of lockers along the back wall, past the filing cabinets. I'd seen them that afternoon during my walkthrough. 6 narrow metal lockers, 3 with nameplates still attached, 3 blank. One of the nameplates read Everett. Transferred was a word that should mean something specific. It means someone filled out paperwork and drove to a new duty station and started answering to a new supervisor. It means a forwarding address, a goodbye in the parking lot, maybe, or a last dinner at whatever passes for a restaurant in the nearest town. It means a person continues. But Everett's locker still had his nameplate. Everett's voice still came through on Channel 4. And for 26 months, the only acknowledgement had been a timestamp and the phrase, "No response per protocol." I closed the binder and put it back on the shelf. My hands were steady. My breathing was normal. But I couldn't stop looking at the logbook on the ops desk, the one with the columns for each rule, the one where Rule 3, the headcount, had been blank for 7 years. I decided I was going to fill it in. I need to explain something about the way I'm built now. After Marcus, after watching them cut his shirt away in the back of the ambulance and seeing what was underneath. The skin on his shoulders split and weeping. Blisters the size of my palm across the back of his neck. After that, I became a different kind of person. Not better, just different. The kind of person who follows every line of every protocol because the alternative is remembering what happens when you don't. 4 seconds? That's what the after-action review determined. I was 4 seconds late on the call-out that would have pulled Engine 7 back before the wind shifted. 4 seconds of hesitation while I looked at a fire behavior chart and second-guessed what my gut already knew. Marcus paid for those 4 seconds with third-degree burns and 8 months of skin grafts. So when I see a blank column in a logbook, a rule that exists on paper but has been quietly abandoned in practice, I don't have the luxury of ignoring it. Not anymore. Every protocol is a debt I'm still paying. At 2200, I picked up the clipboard from the nail beside the ops room door. The headcount form was a simple grid. Date, time, name, location, visual confirmation, signature. I'd seen forms like it 100 times. Fire camps use them. Incident command uses them. You walk through the camp. You lay eyes on every person assigned to your unit. You write it down. It's not complicated. It's not optional. I found Carla in the kitchen. She was making tea, standing with her back to the doorway, and when I told her what I was doing, she didn't turn around immediately. Her hands paused on the kettle. "You really don't need to do that," she said. Quietly. Not dismissive. The way you'd tell someone they don't need to open a door that you know is locked for a reason. It's in the rulebook. Nobody's logged it in 7 years. She turned then, looked at me the way a doctor looks at a patient who's refused the anesthetic. "I know what's in the rulebook." Dale was in the common area, I told him. He was sitting in the armchair by the wood stove, a field guide open on his knee, and he didn't look up. Didn't say anything for a long 5 seconds. "Your call?" he said finally. He still wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the page of his book, but his eyes weren't moving. I marked the time on the clipboard and started upstairs. Carla's quarters were the first door on the left at the top of the stairs. I knocked. She opened it, holding her mug in both hands, a paperback folded open on the bed behind her. She looked at me, looked at the clipboard, and gave a small nod. Carla Marsh, present. I wrote her name, wrote the time, checked the box for visual confirmation. She closed the door before I'd finished writing. Dale's room was the second door. He was sitting on the edge of his bunk with his hands folded between his knees, facing the door. Not reading, not undressing for bed, just sitting, facing the door, as though he'd walked upstairs ahead of me, sat down, and waited. He'd known I was coming. He'd known exactly what I was going to find when I finished. Dale Whitmore, present. He nodded once, said nothing. I wrote his name, checked the box, and stepped back into the hallway. His door stayed open behind me. I could feel him still sitting there, still watching the doorway, as I walked towards the stairs. The third room was mine. I stepped inside, set the clipboard on the bed, and wrote my own name. Collin Bryce, present. 3 personnel assigned to Kettle Hollow Ranger Station. 3 personnel visually confirmed in their quarters. The math was simple. It should have ended there. But procedure requires a walkthrough of common areas. That's not a suggestion. That's how headcounts work. You verify the people, then you verify the spaces. You confirm that the count matches the number of living bodies assigned to the post, and that no areas are unaccounted for. I went back downstairs. Kitchen, empty. The kettle Carla had used was still on the burner, cooling. I touched it. Warm. A dish towel hung from the oven handle, folded in thirds. Everything in order. The common area. The wood stove was banked low, embers ticking behind the grate. Dale's field guide lay on the arm of the chair where he'd left it. The room smelled like wood ash and old varnish, and the faint mineral scent of the stone walls holding the day's cold. The ops room. I pushed the door open and reached for the light switch out of habit, but the overhead fluorescent was already on. I'd turned it off after radio watch. I was certain of that. I always turn off lights when I leave a room. It's not a preference. It's pattern. The same way I always lock a fire shelter back into its harness, the same direction. The same way I always key a radio twice before transmitting. Muscle memory built on the understanding that small discipline prevents large failure. The light was on, and the chair, the swivel chair at the radio desk, had moved. When I'd left the ops room, it had been pushed against the wall at the far end of the desk, facing the window. Standard. That's where you leave it when you're done with watch. Pushed in, facing the console. The chair was now in the center of the room, turned to face the door, facing me. I stood in the doorway. The fluorescent buzzed above me. That particular 60-cycle hum that becomes the loudest sound in the world when everything else goes quiet. The generator throbbed outside. The creak moved. And in the ops room, a chair sat in the center of the floor, oriented toward the exact spot where I was standing. And the air held a quality I can only describe as weight. Not temperature, not smell, pressure. The kind of pressure you feel when someone is standing behind you in a dark hallway and you haven't turned around yet. There was someone in that room, not visible, not audible, but present the way a held breath is present, felt in the silence it creates, rather than any sound it makes. I looked at the clipboard. 3 names, 3 confirmations, 3 personnel assigned to Kettle Hollow. I walked to the ops desk. I opened the logbook to the Rule 3 column. I picked up the pen. Under the date, in the headcount field that had been blank for 7 years, I wrote the number 4. I set the pen down, closed the logbook, walked upstairs to my quarters, and locked the door. I did not sleep. In the morning, I was going to make Dale explain what I had done. I found Dale on the porch at 6:45 the next morning. Sitting in the split-bottom rocker with a mug of coffee he wasn't drinking. Steam had stopped rising from it. I don't know how long he'd been out there. He looked different. Not sick, exactly, just settled into something. The way a ridgeline looks after a wildfire has moved through. Same shape, same elevation, but stripped of everything that used to soften it. He was 53 years old. That morning, he looked like every single one of them. I sat down on the bench across from him, and I didn't ease into it. I told him what I'd done. I told him I'd followed Rule 3, conducted the head count at 2,200, walked each room, made visual confirmation of every person present, and logged the number before 22:30. I told him the number was 4. Dale set his mug on the railing. He didn't look surprised. He looked like a man watching a weather front arrive that he'd seen building on the horizon for days. "How many times did you count?" he asked. 3. He nodded. Slow. The way you nod when someone confirms a diagnosis. For a long time, the only sound was the creek below the station, running over its stones. A nuthatch worked the bark of the white oak by the equipment shed. Normal morning. Normal light. The kind of silence that should feel peaceful, but didn't, because Dale was visibly deciding what to tell me. And every second he deliberated made the shape of the answer worse. "Last person who ran the head count was a woman named Reeves," he said, 3 years ago, maybe closer to 4 now. He rubbed his jaw. "She was good, thorough, same as you. Saw it in the manual, thought we'd been sloppy, decided to do it right." "What happened?" "She counted 4, same as you. 1 more than should have been here." He picked up the mug, looked into it, set it back down. "Next night, she counted again. Got 5. The nuthatch stopped, flew off. "She transferred out inside a week," Dale said. But the word transferred came out of his mouth with a specific gravity I recognized, the same hollow weight I'd felt when I read the personnel roster in the archive index. A word doing the work of a sentence no one wanted to complete. I asked him directly. No preamble, no softening. I asked him what the thing in the count was. Dale looked at me for the first time that morning. Really looked. And I saw something behind his eyes that I can only describe as 20 years of practiced, deliberate blindness. Cracking. He didn't answer the question. Not the way I'd asked it. What he told me instead was this. The station has a covenant. He didn't use that word. He said arrangement. But covenant is what he meant. And I think he knew it. The presence, and he wouldn't call it that either. He just said it. The pronoun standing alone, with nothing to modify, has been part of Kettle Hollow longer than any living ranger, longer than the CCC stonework, longer than the service road. He said it the way you'd describe a geographic feature. A seep spring, a rock outcrop, something that predates human tenure and will outlast it. It doesn't move through the station. It doesn't speak. It doesn't open doors or shift furniture or appear in doorways. It doesn't harm anyone. These were the terms, as Dale understood them. And he laid them out with the flattened calm of a man reciting a lease agreement he signed decades ago and has honored every day since. The condition is singular. No one formally acknowledges it. The headcount is the problem, not the looking. Dale has glimpsed things over 20 years, peripheral flickers, a shadow with slightly wrong proportions in a hallway that should have been empty. He's learned not to focus, not to resolve the image. That's survivable. That's just weather. But Rule 3 isn't a glance. Rule 3 is a protocol. It requires you to enter each room, visually confirm each person present, record the number, and log it. It is, by design, an act of formal bureaucratic recognition. A census. And when you count something, you declare that it exists. You give it a number. You make it official. Once counted, it knows you can see it. Dale has survived 2 decades at Kettle Hollow by never, not once, looking at the number. He doesn't conduct the head count. He doesn't ask about personnel figures. When the quarterly compliance reports go to district, he writes N/A, single station protocol, visual confirmation impractical in the Rule 3 field, and no one has ever questioned it. No one at district wants to question anything about Kettle Hollow. You can't uncount it, Collin. He said it simply, the way you'd tell someone that a river only flows one direction. Not cruel, just the way it is. I asked him about the history, the full record. What happened to the Rangers before Reeves? Before him? He stood up, collected his mug, and walked inside. At the door, he paused. I've told you what I can. If Dale wouldn't give me the history, the archive would. Rule 4 permitted basement access between 0700 and 1700 hours. It was 6:58. I waited on the porch for 2 minutes, watching the second hand on my field watch, and then I went downstairs. At 0700 exactly, I unlocked the basement door with the key from the ops room pegboard. Third hook from the left, brass key, green paracord loop. The lock was a heavy 5-pin deadbolt, newer than the door itself, maybe replaced in the last decade. The door was original. Hand-planed chestnut, CCC era, with hand-forged strap hinges that had gone black with age. It opened inward and downward. Stone steps, 9 of them, worn concave at center from 90 years of boot traffic. The basement air hit me at the 3rd step. Not cold the way an underground space should be cold. Not the stable 55 degrees of a root cellar. This was sharper. Mineral. The kind of cold that feels like it has edges. I could smell damp stone, old paper, and something faintly metallic that reminded me of well water drawn from deep formations. I pulled the chain on the overhead bulb at the base of the stairs. 40 watts, maybe 60. It turned the space amber and left the corners suggestions. The archive was organized, meticulously organized, in fact, in a way that seemed at odds with a station that couldn't keep its headcount protocol active. Steel shelving units lined 3 walls, gray GSA standard, each shelf labeled with masking tape and marker in handwriting that spanned what looked like several generations of rangers. Personnel files, incident reports, trail maintenance logs, equipment inventories, daily operations binders arranged by decade, the oldest spines cracked and water-stained, the newest still holding their color. I stood in the center of the room and looked up. And this is where I hesitated. The basement ceiling was low. I knew that I could feel it. The mild compression of being underground in a building that was already built low. But I'd walked the exterior foundation that first week. I'd measured sight lines for the radio antenna installation. The station's ground floor sits 42 inches above grade on the uphill side. The basement, by any reasonable engineering, should have offered a full 8-foot ceiling below the floor joists. I was looking at 6 feet, maybe 6'2". I'm 5'11", and the joists were close enough that I was conscious of them. Not enough clearance was simply missing. The geometry didn't resolve. I felt the way you feel when you're reading a topographic map, and the contour lines don't match the terrain in front of you. Not alarmed, exactly, but aware that your information and your reality have diverged. I found the box I needed on the second shelf of the far wall. Daily operations logs, 1974 through 2002, in 9 binders. A second box held 2003 through present. I stacked them carefully, carried them up the stairs in 2 trips, and set them on the ops room table in the gray morning light. Rule 4 says, don't read files in the basement. I followed it to the letter. Whatever reason that rule exists, I wasn't going to find out in a room with a ceiling that couldn't account for itself. I opened the first binder. The earliest log was April 1974. Ranger Station, Kettle Hollow, daily operations. The handwriting was precise, slanted slightly left, the ink blue-black, and faded to the color of old denim. The entries were mundane. Trail conditions, weather observations, equipment requests, supply runs to Franklin. I wasn't reading for content. I was reading for numbers. It took me 40 minutes to find the first one. August 19th, 1974. The entry was routine. Evening walkthrough. All secure. But the headcount field read 3. The station complement at that time, according to the personnel page at the front of the binder, was 2. I marked the page with a pencil, kept reading. September 4th, 1974. Headcount 3. September 5th. Headcount 4. September 7th. The handwriting changed. New ranger, new binder section. The previous ranger's name was Eckhart. The next entry, written in a rounder, more upright hand, listed the station complement as 2 and did not include a headcount entry. The Rule 3 field was blank from that point forward for 11 months. I went through every binder. It took most of the day. Carla brought me coffee at 10 and again at 1 and didn't ask what I was doing. She looked at the binders spread across the table, the way you'd look at a road, leads somewhere bad. Brief, averted, deliberate. The pattern was consistent across 30 years of records. Every time a new ranger followed Rule 3, the count exceeded actual personnel by 1. Sometimes the margin grew on successive nights. 4 in a 3-person station, then 5, then 6. The increments weren't uniform, but the direction was. Always up. Always more than should be there. And periodically, the count corrected, dropped back to the actual number, right where it should be. Normal. 2 rangers at a 2-person station. 3 at a 3-person station. Clean, accurate, reconciled. On those dates, every single one. The next logbook entry was written in different handwriting. A new ranger. A transfer. 17 corrections since 1974. 17 times the number came back to baseline. 17 times the previous handwriting simply stopped, mid-binder, sometimes mid-week. And someone new picked up the pen without comment, without explanation, without a single reference to their predecessor. I closed the last binder. I sat in the ops room and listened to the clock on the wall tick through the silence, and then I stood up and walked to the locker room at the end of the hall. There are 20 lockers at Kettle Hollow. Standard metal, half height, painted the same institutional green as the shelving downstairs. 3 are in current use: mine, Dale's, Carla's. Each has a nameplate slid into the bracket on the door. Printed on label tape, first initial, last name. 17 of the remaining lockers still have nameplates. I read each one. I didn't recognize a single name, but I recognized the count. I went back to the ops room, reboxed the binders, returned them to the basement before 1700, and locked the door. I hung the key on the 3rd hook. I logged my archive access in the station ledger with the entry and exit times. Then I went back to work. Because the trails still needed checking, and the radio still needed monitoring, and whatever I now understood about Kettle Hollow's history, the station still had to function. But the work felt different. Every room I entered, I was counting. The changes were small. That's what made them so hard to dismiss. My coffee mug, I set it on the right side of the radio console the way I always did. Handle pointing toward me at roughly 4 o'clock. Standard habit, same position every morning. I turned to pull the weather printout from the fax tray. 5 seconds, maybe 8. And when I reached for the mug again, it was on the left side. Handle at 9 o'clock. Coffee still warm. No one else in the room. I didn't mention it. I moved the mug back. 20 minutes later, it was on the windowsill. My patrol log developed entries I hadn't written. My handwriting, unmistakably, the same tight print I've used since Fire Academy, the same abbreviations, the same way I form my 7s with a crossbar. But I hadn't written them. Trail conditions I hadn't observed. Timestamps from hours when I'd been in my bunk. November 14th, 1340. South Ridge Trail clear. No foot traffic. Cairn count nominal. I was eating lunch at 1340. Carla was across the table from me. I remember because we talked about the propane delivery schedule. Movement became constant at the periphery, not outside. That was the part that unsettled me most. Whatever had changed, it was contained entirely within the station walls. A shape passing a doorway I'd just walked through. A shift in the light in the hall, as though someone had crossed between the window and the wall. Always behind me, always at the edge, always gone when I turned. Not because it was fast, but because it was never quite where I looked. It wasn't hiding. It was adjacent. I want to be precise about this. It wasn't aggressive. There was no menace in it. If anything, The quality of the attention felt like observation. Clinical. Patient. The way a biologist watches a specimen it has just tagged. I had counted it. Now, it was counting me. On November 16th, I hiked the perimeter trail for the weekly cairn survey. The existing markers were unchanged. Same positions, same construction, same stones. But at the 3/4 mile mark, where the trail bends closest to the station before looping back out toward the ridge, there was a new one. 7 stones, stacked with a precision that didn't look natural. No weathering, no lichen. It hadn't been there 4 days ago. It was 60 yards from the station's back wall. I logged its position per Rule 1 and did not approach within 10 feet. I photographed it from the trail. I did not touch it. My hands wanted to. I kept them at my sides. The man arrived on a Tuesday, mid-morning, overcast, the kind of flat November light that makes the whole cove look like a photograph of itself. He came up the access road on foot. No vehicle at the trailhead. I'd have heard it on the gravel, and the motion sensor at the gate hadn't triggered. He just appeared at the tree line and walked toward the station with the unhurried pace of someone who knew exactly where he was going. 35, maybe 40. Average build. Clean-shaven. He was wearing a soft shell jacket and trail pants that looked like they'd come out of a catalog that morning. His day pack sat high and tight on his shoulders, visibly empty. The compression straps cinched against nothing. He stepped onto the porch and knocked twice. Polite. Measured. I opened the door. "I got separated from my group," he said. 4 of us started at Wyabald this morning. I lost them at the fork." His voice was calm, conversational, like he was telling me about a movie he'd watched. I invited him to wait on the porch and went to the radio. Rule 5. Verify the hiker's party through district before initiating a search. I keyed the handset and made the call. District came back in 4 minutes. No group of 4 was registered for the Wyabald corridor. No overnight permits. No day use logs matching the description. No one was on that trail. I went back to the porch to tell him, and while I stood in the doorway, I looked down. His boots were pristine, factory clean. No mud, no scuffing, no trail dust, no moisture line from dew-wet grass. They had never touched a trail surface. They were boots that existed from the ankle up only. The idea of boots worn by someone who understood the concept but had missed the details. "Might be a registration mix-up," I said, keeping my voice level. He smiled. It was pleasant. It was perfectly pleasant. And it reached his eyes the way a smile is supposed to. And there was absolutely nothing behind it. "I can wait," he said. I went inside. Carla was standing by the front window. She hadn't said a word during any of it. She looked at me, and then she walked to the front door and turned the deadbolt. The lock engaged with a sound, like a period at the end of a sentence. Neither of us spoke. Neither of us went back to the window. 5 minutes passed, maybe 10. The porch boards didn't creak. No footsteps on the gravel. When Dale checked the porch an hour later, it was empty. No boot prints, no scuff marks on the steps. The rocking chair was in a slightly different position, but that could have been the wind. Could have been. I found it on the ops room table at 1600. A 4x6 print, glossy, color faded the way photographs from 10 years ago fade. Not sepia, just slightly less vivid than life. The red's gone soft, the shadows gone blue. My photograph, the one I kept in my locker per Rule 6, the one I had definitely, certainly, without question, placed inside my locker that morning, because I place it there every morning. 'Cause following the rules at Kettle Hollow is the only structure between me and whatever is unraveling around it. It was sitting on the table, face up, centered, as though someone had laid it there with care. I picked it up. The original photograph was taken in 2019 at the Pisgah Engine Bay, 2 days before the burnover that ended my time on the fire line. It showed 2 people, me and Marcus Ware, standing in front of Engine 7. Marcus had his arm across my shoulders. We were both in yellow Nomex, both grinning, both 20 pounds lighter than we should have been from a season of 16-hour shifts and MREs. Behind us, the engine. Behind the engine, the tree line, clear sky, simple composition. 2 men and a machine and a forest that hadn't tried to kill us yet. That is what the photograph showed. 2 people. I have looked at it hundreds of times. I know its geometry the way I know my own face. The photograph on the table showed 3 people. The third figure stood slightly behind us and to the right, occupying a space that, in the original, was empty air between Marcus's shoulder and the engine's mirror housing. It was wearing a USFS uniform, the green pants, the gray shirt, the arrowhead patch. On the left sleeve, a station patch. I didn't need to look closely to read it, but I did. Kettle Hollow. The face was present, but indistinct, not blurred. The rest of the image was sharp. The features simply didn't resolve. Like looking at someone through old glass, or remembering a face you saw once in a crowd. There and not there. Countable, but not knowable. I put the photograph in my locker. I closed the door. I turned the combination lock until it clicked. I did not take it out again. I haven't looked at it since. I don't know if the third figure is still there, or if there are 4 now, or 5. I don't want to count. 3 weeks passed. The routines held. The rules held. The station functioned the way stations function. Radio checks, trail reports, supply inventories, weather logs. Dale went on scheduled leave. Carla drove to district for an overnight training session. For the first time since my arrival at Kettle Hollow, I was alone in the station. I sat in the ops room at 2100 hours and listened to the building breathe around me. The settling timber, the baseboard ticking, the generator's low hum from the shed outside. And I understood, with a clarity I did not want, that alone was not the correct word for what I was. 3 weeks. That's how long it took for the station to get me alone. I don't think it was coincidence. Dale's leave had been on the books since before I arrived. 2 weeks visiting his sister in Roanoke. Something about her knee surgery. Carla got called to a district budget meeting in Franklin, overnight. Wouldn't be back until noon the next day. Normal operational scheduling. Reasonable. Documented. And yet the station had emptied around me, like water finding a drain. I noticed the cairn at 1740, right as the last band of sun slipped behind the western ridge. It sat at the far edge of the clearing, maybe 60 yards from the porch. A neat stack of 5 stones, river smooth, placed with a precision that had nothing to do with hikers marking a trail. It hadn't been there that morning. I'd walked the perimeter at 06:30, same as every day, and the ground where it stood had been bare. Wet leaves. Nothing else. Rule 1 said, don't approach unmarked cairns within 10 feet. I stayed on the porch. I could follow that one from here. At 1800, the radio spoke, not dispatch, not Carla checking in from the road. A man's voice, mid-sentence, reading weather conditions, in a tone so flat and practiced, it sounded like a recording. Winds southwest at 4. Barometric pressure 30.12. Cloud cover 60%. Precipitation unlikely before. Then nothing. No sign-off. No station kettle. Clear. Just the frequency falling back to static, like a held breath released. I didn't respond. Rule 2. At 1900, it happened again. Different voice this time. Younger, a little faster, reading trail conditions on the Nantahala Rim section. Debris from last week's ice event. 2 blowdowns across the switchback at mile marker 9. Passable on foot, but gone. Same dead air. Same absent closing phrase. At 2000, another. Quieter. Tired sounding. Reporting a campfire spotted from the south overlook. A routine observation from a routine shift, delivered to no one, answered by no one, hanging in the static like smoke that wouldn't clear. I stood at the radio desk and listened to the transmissions layer in on the hour, each one different, each one professional, each one incomplete. These weren't recordings. The cadences were too natural, the pauses too human. The way a person stops mid-thought to glance at a gauge or check a logbook before continuing. Living voices doing real work. But none of them were live. I knew that the way you know a room is cold before you touch the walls. Something in the frequency itself felt wrong. Too clean. Too close. As though the signal wasn't traveling any distance at all. By 2100, I'd stopped writing them down. There was no protocol for this. There was no form. There was only the growing certainty that the station was filling up with something I couldn't see, and the clock on the ops room wall grinding toward the one rule I'd never broken. Headcount. I sat in the kitchen and stared at the logbook. 1 ranger on duty, 1 person in the building. The simplest count there is. I could skip it. I could do what Dale does, what Carla does, what every ranger before me apparently did, leave the 2200 line blank and go to bed. Become what they are. Survive the way they survive. I thought about it. I genuinely thought about it. But I could still feel Marcus's skin under my hands, the way it moved wrong when I grabbed his shoulders to pull him clear. The smell of his jacket melting. The 4 seconds I stood there, doing nothing because I forgot, for 4 seconds, what the protocol was. I didn't freeze because I was scared. I froze because I lost the procedure, and without the procedure, I was just a man standing in a fire. I am who I am because of what I failed to do. I picked up the clipboard. I walked the station. I counted. 1. Just me. Boots on hardwood, flashlight beam tracking the walls, every room confirmed empty. I returned to the ops desk, opened the logbook, and wrote the entry. 2200. Headcount conducted. Station personnel, 1. All quarters confirmed vacant. C. Bryce. I set the pen down. I looked at what I'd written. and the number changed, not while I watched. That's the thing I keep coming back to. I didn't see the ink move. I didn't see the digit reform itself on the page. I set the pen down, glanced at the radio, half expecting the 2200 transmission, and when I looked back at the logbook, the entry read differently. 2200, headcount conducted, station personnel, 2. My handwriting, my pen pressure, my slight leftward lean on the descenders, the way I cross sevens out of old habit. Every part of it was mine. But I wrote one. I know I wrote one. Somewhere on the second floor, a door closed, not slammed, not shoved by a draft, closed the way a person closes a door when they know someone else is sleeping. Carefully, with the knob turned so the latch doesn't click. Considerate. That's the word that surfaced in my mind and wouldn't leave. Whoever closed that door was being considerate. I stood up. The hallway to the stairs looked shorter than it should have. I'd walked this building every day for 3 weeks, and I knew the distance from the ops desk to the staircase was 14 paces. It looked like 9. The ceiling felt lower, too, though I couldn't have told you by how much. Just a compression, a gentle tightening, as though the station were drawing itself inward around whatever occupied it. I took the stairs. 14 steps, same as always, but each one felt abbreviated, my boots landing too soon, the risers too shallow. Dale's door was closed. The spare quarters door was closed. My door, the one I'd left open that morning, was closed. I opened Dale's room. Empty. Bed made tight the way he leaves it. I opened the spare. Empty. Dust on the desk. A stripped mattress. Nothing. I opened my room and counted. 1. Me, reflected in the dark window glass, flashlight beam cutting across my own face, the only person on this floor. Back downstairs. The logbook still read 2. I heard the basement then. Not a voice, exactly. More like the shape a voice leaves in a quiet room. The displacement of silence. But it sharpened as I stood at the ops desk, and I recognized it. I recognized the cadence, the rhythm, the specific way the consonants hit. It was my voice, coming from beneath the floor, saying my name. Collin Bryce. Not the way a person calls out. Not alarm, not greeting, not threat. The way a person reads a name off a list while making a mark beside it. Administrative, confirming attendance. The voice under the floor was conducting a headcount, and I was on it. The basement padlock hung open on its hasp. I hadn't touched it. I hadn't been near the basement door since morning, when I'd checked it during my perimeter walk and confirmed it locked. The hasp was steel, old but solid. The key was in the lockbox behind the ops desk, and the lockbox was still latched. The padlock simply hung there, open, like a gate left unlatched for someone expected. I didn't go down. I want to be clear about that. Whatever protocol demanded, whatever compulsion lived in my chest, I did not open that door. Not because I was brave, because the part of my brain that follows rules finally encountered a rule it couldn't override: self-preservation. I went back to the logbook. I picked up the pen. Beneath the altered entry, in the steadiest hand I could manage, I wrote 2203. Count conducted. Station personnel. 1. Other occupants. Present. Then I climbed the stairs, entered my quarters, locked the door, pushed the desk against it, and sat on the bed with my back to the wall and my flashlight on until the windows turned gray. I did not sleep. The station did not make another sound. But the silence had weight to it, the particular quality of a building that is occupied, where someone else is also awake, also sitting in the dark, also waiting for morning. At 0640, I heard tires on gravel. Dale's truck. I moved the desk. I unlocked the door. I went downstairs and waited for him in the kitchen. Dale looked tired from the drive. He set his bag by the door, hung his jacket on the peg, and put the coffee on before he looked at me. Whatever he saw in my face didn't surprise him. He just nodded, slow, like a doctor confirming a diagnosis he'd already suspected. "You counted," he said. I didn't answer. He poured 2 cups and sat down across from me at the kitchen table. The logbook was between us, still open to last night's page. He read both entries, the altered one and mine beneath it. Then he closed the book gently, the way you close something that doesn't belong to you. "I was going to tell you," he said. "I was waiting to see if you'd stop on your own." "Tell me what?" He wrapped both hands around his mug. Steam rose between us. Outside, the clearing was bright and ordinary, frost burning off the grass, a nuthatch working the porch rail. The cairn was gone. I'd checked from the window at first light. Bare ground, wet leaves. "The hollow collects," Dale said. "That's the simplest way I know to say it. It's not haunted. It's not cursed. It's a feature. Like a sinkhole or a cold air pool or a magnetic anomaly. The Forest Service has never classified it because there's no classification for what it does. But they know. They've known since the CCC. He told me about the construction crews. Summer of 1934. 37 men assigned to build the station, quarrying stone from the creek bed, felling timber from the north slope. The foreman ran a headcount every morning and every evening. Standard Civilian Conservation Corps procedure. Men accounted for, tools accounted for, materials accounted for. By the second week, the evening counts were coming back wrong. 1 extra, sometimes 2. Never the same man missing. No one was missing. The total was simply higher than the roster. The foreman reported it as a clerical error, then as men drifting in from other camp assignments. Then he stopped reporting it entirely, because the explanations required more effort than the problem seemed to justify. The station got built. The crews moved on. But the count was in the records, and someone at the regional office noticed. Rule 3 was written as a monitoring tool, Dale said. That's all it was supposed to be. Count it, document it, track the accumulation over time, like measuring water levels in a well. The Forest Service wanted data. What changed? The data changed things. He looked at the logbook between us. Counting made it stronger, or counting made it more present, more defined, more consistent. The rangers who documented it carefully, who followed the protocol exactly, they started hearing more, seeing more. The hollow responded to observation like it was being fed. The old-timers figured it out on their own. Stop counting, and the count stays low. Keep your head down. Do your work. Don't measure what's in the room with you. The informal wisdom became policy. Real policy. The kind that never gets written down. I asked the question I already knew the answer to. Why does everyone ignore the rule? Dale set his mug down and looked at me with something that might have been pity. Because the count goes both ways, Collin. He said it simply. No drama, no gravity in his voice. Just a man stating a mechanical fact about equipment he's worked around for 20 years. You count the presence, and the presence counts you. That's how it works. That's how it's always worked. You open the logbook, you walk the station, you run the head count, and something in the walls runs the head count right back. Your name goes on its list the same way its number goes on yours. It's a transaction. And once you're on the list, you're in the accumulation. I thought about my voice beneath the floor, the way it spoke my name, not threatening, not hungry, clerical. Every ranger who ignored the rule survived, Dale said. They did their time. They transferred out. They went on with their lives. Every ranger who followed it, who really followed it, night after night, documenting the count, tracking the numbers. He paused, drank his coffee, set the mug down precisely in the ring it had already left on the table. They're still here. Everett. Everett followed every rule in the book. Perfect ranger. Filed his reports on time, maintained the station, kept the logbook immaculate. He's still filing reports. You've heard them? 1800, 1900, 2000, weather conditions, trail status, fire risk. He's still on shift. No one ever told him his shift was over, because he never left. He's in the frequency, in the walls, and account. He's the one that makes the number come back wrong. He's not the only one. No. Dale looked at the row of lockers along the far wall. 17 of them. He's not the only one. I understood then, fully, the way understanding arrives, not as revelation, but as confirmation of something the body already knew. Rule 3 wasn't protection. It was instrumentation. The Forest Service wrote it to measure what lived in the hollow, and every ranger who faithfully executed the measurement became part of the data set. Absorbed, integrated. Still working, still reporting, still conducting head counts in a building they never left, and a shift that never ended. The perpetually open posting, the easy transfers, no questions asked. The way district processed my application in 3 days. They weren't filling a position. They were replacing a sensor. And when the sensor wore out, when it got too close, counted too carefully, documented too faithfully, the hollow simply kept it, added it to the collection. One more voice on the radio, one more door closing politely in the dark. The Forest Service knows, I said. The Forest Service has always known. And they keep sending people. Dale finished his coffee, rinsed the mug, set it in the rack. Every motion precise, economical, the habits of a man who has made peace with a situation by reducing it to routine. The conscientious ones count, he said. The rest of us don't. That's the system. I put in my transfer request that afternoon. District approved it in 4 hours. No exit interview. No questions about my abbreviated tenure. No performance review. No forwarding notes for my replacement. Just a confirmation email routed through the Nantahala supervisor's office. Transfer approved. Report to Blackwater Station, Monongahela, NF, November 15th. Travel reimbursement attached, clean as a form letter. Which, I suspect, it was. My last night at Kettle Hollow was quiet. The radio stayed silent after 1700. No cairns in the clearing. No unexplained sounds from the basement or the second floor. The station behaved itself the way a thing behaves when it's already gotten what it came for. Patient, settled, replete. I didn't open the logbook. I didn't walk the building at 2200. I sat on the porch with Dale and watched the dark settle into the cove like something poured. Next one will probably follow it too, Dale said. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the tree line, where the last gray light clung to the upper canopy like something unwilling to let go. The rule, the count, they usually do, the first few weeks. The conscientious ones always do. What happens when the count gets high enough? He didn't answer immediately. He rocked his chair once, twice, the runners scraping the porch boards in a rhythm that sounded older than him. Then he looked through the window behind us, toward the mudroom wall where the lockers stood in their row. 17 of them, most unlabeled, some still holding gear that belonged to people who, according to every official record, simply transferred out. It already is, he said. I didn't ask anything else. There was nothing else to ask. We sat in the dark for another hour, listening to the generator hum and the creek run over stones, and the forest do what the forest does at night when no one is measuring it. I left at first light, packed my truck in 12 minutes. Less gear than I came with, though I couldn't have told you what was missing. Drove the 14 miles of gravel with the windows down. October air, sharp and clean. The canopy closing overhead in the rear-view mirror the way it always does. Same road, same trees, same distance. But something in the proportions had changed, or something in me had changed, and the forest felt like a room I was leaving rather than a landscape I was driving through. I didn't look back at the station. I didn't slow down at mile 3 when the cell signal returned. I drove until the gravel became asphalt, and the asphalt became highway, and the mountains flattened into foothills, and the weight of the cove released from my chest 1 degree at a time. Blackwater Station sits in a river valley in the Monongahela, 260 miles north-northeast of Kettle Hollow. Different forest, different watershed, different chain of command. The building is newer. 1970s construction, concrete block and metal roofing, good sight lines, functional plumbing, normal. My supervisor is a woman named Tran, who has never heard of Kettle Hollow and has no reason to. I do my work. I file my reports. I maintain the trails and check the fire rings and process the permits and do everything a ranger is supposed to do at a station where nothing is wrong. And nothing is wrong here. I'm certain of that. Almost. But every night at 2200, the compulsion finds me. Not a sound, not a voice, just the pull, the quiet, mechanical need to stand up, pick up a clipboard, walk the building, count. It lives in my hands and in my feet and in the part of my brain that learned years ago in the Pisgah that if you don't follow the procedure, someone gets hurt. Marcus taught me that. His burns taught me that. 4 seconds of hesitation wrote the rule into my body, and the body doesn't forget. So I count, every night. I walk my new station, and I count the personnel, and I log the number, and the number is always correct. 2 rangers on night shift, 2 rangers logged, 2 rangers present, clean. Until last week. Last Tuesday, the count came back 3. I walked the station twice, checked every room, confirmed 2 personnel on duty, myself and Dennings, the night shift volunteer. 2 people, 2 sets of boots by the door, 2 coffee mugs on the counter. But the number in my head, the number my hands wanted to write, was 3. I logged 2. I forced the pen to make the correct mark, but the feeling stayed. The spatial awareness of a third presence somewhere in the building. Close. Not threatening. Just there. Occupying a room I hadn't checked. Standing in a hallway I hadn't walked. Waiting to be counted. I told myself it was different here. Different hollow, different geography, different history. But the walls are CCC stone. I checked the cornerstone last month, 1936, 2 years after Kettle Hollow. Same public works allocation. Same regional crew rotation. Built in the same decade by the same hands, on the same foundation of men who counted themselves every morning and evening, and sometimes came back with 1 too many. And there's a rule in this station's handbook that everyone ignores. Section 4, subsection 3, red tab. I've seen the other rangers skip past it. I've seen trans eyes move over it the way Dale's moved over Rule 3. Not reading, not acknowledging, just passing through the space where the words are and continuing to the next page. I haven't read it yet. I'm not going to. It's 21:53 right now, 7 minutes. I can feel the clipboard on the desk behind me the way you feel a door you know is unlocked. The pen is where I left it. The logbook is open to today's page. I'm going to stay in this chair. I'm going to watch the minute hand pass 2200. And I'm going to let the number stay uncounted, and I'm going to become, for the first time in my career, the kind of ranger who ignores a rule on purpose. But the building is quiet in the way that means it isn't empty, and the number is already forming in my chest. Not a thought, not a voice, just a weight, a certainty. A figure I can almost read if I let myself look. I'm not going to count. I already know what the number is.